You know that old thing where everybody says you're scattered, you can't focus on one thing. That's why you'll never get a job, or you'll never be suited for a normal job or a normal occupation. And you know that you're not suited, you can't hold a job, or you don't want to hold a job for any longer than, I don't know, a month or two. That's exactly how I was as a young person. The Kaleidoscope's entire purpose is to thrill you and surprise you with its constant and unpredictable changes. The coloured glass is contained inside the scope's body, and the images are contained within a vessel. So it's a great metaphor. That's the vocation. Now, society expects the kaleidoscope to do this. It wants it to do this. You buy it because it does this. What would happen if you went to buy one and it only gave you 10 designs that were pre-programmed? Hello? Think about it. I had no regrets about it either. Nothing fitted me. I would go and I would do a job, all sorts of very strange jobs, and I would do it exceptionally well, and the bosses always wanted me to stay. You're the best toilet cleaner we've ever had. You're the best pizza maker. You're the best barmaid, and all that jazz, because everything that we do, we put everything into. We throw ourselves into it. And you know what? Because we do that, we learn, we bite through it, we eat through it really fast. And once we've done that, the thrill is over. We're done with it, we're done. And very few of us get to the end of that period of learning and think, oh yes, I want to do this for the rest of my life. So we often get called scatterbrains or bouncing balls, all the rest of it, all over the place. And eventually we start saying that about ourselves. Sometimes I've heard us called generalists. And we will go on and on like that and never really let anyone tie us down until we find the right container. And a container is pretty much a vocation or an occupation or a focused purpose. And my advice to a young person who has this similar shape or, dynamic, and many artists do, is that the only career advice I'd give you is to make sure that the container that you choose, the vocation, has enough scope in it, enough room to move in it, that it doesn't make you look scattered, that it has stretchy edges, so what you do inside it actually is congratulated, it's rewarded. You're rewarded for being a change artist. You're rewarded for being a chameleon. You're rewarded for coming up with new ideas all the time. So instead of you trying to squeeze yourself into this box, you've got to think really deeply about what industry, what vocation, what role, what job celebrates that kind of nature. And of course, we often land back as artists and writers and musicians and filmmakers, all these kinds of occupations, because they have boundaries. We've been talking about learn the vocation, learn your tools of your trade, etc., learn your skills. But you have to find somewhere where that place that you land in is actually a good fit. And that is probably the biggest mistake I've seen made for young creative spirits with that particular nature, where they try to bind themselves into something that doesn't fit. And then of course we leave because it doesn't fit, and we know it intuitively. We become a scattered mess, everybody judges us. But when we're rewarded for being like that, we're on the right track. Now the question is how to drill down without fear of being trapped in the drill down choice and then missing out on what else might be out there to chase and do. At what point does the generalist peg something to the wall or know what to focus on? Jordan Peterson's quote was, "Choose your sacrifice at some point." That's all very well, Jordan, and I agree to some degree, but I don't think it's that cut and dry when you are inside it. Usually you don't choose what you end up sacrificing. It's that your leg gets caught in a trap as you're running through the jungle because of some other necessity. Like you have to pay the rent or feed the kids. That's how I see creative people getting finally trapped. And they suffer for it too, begrudgingly, and because of, love and honour and all that, they do bumble through, but they always feel like they've missed out on something and they will return to it later in life. A creatively natured person struggles a lot for a long time early in their lives, and often all through their lives, because they have too many ideas that they want to try and do. Before I became an artist, I had no intention of sticking with one thing. It was like the world was my oyster. You know the old saying, jack of all trades, master of none. That was the original saying. But even that saying was later on bastardized into an insult. But it actually began as a compliment, meaning a very versatile person. I think it was in the 1600s. And it just meant that you can imagine back then that you had to be like that. We'd probably do well back in those times. In this specialised age, we tend to stand out more. I had this discussion with my son, who is an ENFP like me, and he is good at everything and anything he takes on. But at 30 years old, I told him that story about the container, about how the key thing is not to choose your sacrifice. How about if you've got all these choices in front of you, ask yourself this question: does this particular pathway give me the maximum amount of room to do the maximum amount of creative tangents that I can as a natural person? You're not necessarily going to get that exactly right at the start, but it's a good start. I absolutely am sure that the reason we have so much diagnosis of mental disorder is because of a huge industry of unnatural expectation. It's just risen up out of, it's like an industrial profit complex, and our lives have become so material and empty that really creative people with this true nature of being super creative, we feel as if we've been betrayed, like the world has betrayed us, but we don't know that. It's an internal thing. For a creative person, now that I've mapped that out, someone who's got like a really wide lens and perception by nature, this is particularly dangerous because their field of reference is extremely broad. So people like this are the least judgmental because they know there's always more to the story. Their door is wide open and vulnerable. And that means vulnerability to lures and temptations that can easily distract them, at the same time that they can see what others can't see over the horizon. Oh my goodness, give us a break. We've got a lot to deal with. So if you're that way inclined, here's a bit of a tip to stop the spinning cycle. You've got to fully understand your nature, completely, in all reality and lovingly. Cut out the judgment. And we can't do that as measured by anyone other than someone you admire, and that would be like a mentor. And they've got to be really happy in their occupation. Someone who is being rewarded in that occupation for being as mad and unpredictable in their creativity as a kaleidoscope. So the reason you adore them, you love them, pay close attention to what they're actually doing, as long as you're not making a misfire. I remember someone saying they wanted to be a chef because they loved watching the celebrity chefs, and then trained as a chef and realised that it was pretty bloody horrible in those kitchens back there, but then realised later on that what they were really aspiring to was the communication, the TV, the stuff, the dynamics, the exciting creative change and the rest of it. So it's really easy to sort of go off track. So really study, look right inside what that mentor is actually doing that you love. Now, before you leap off the couch and scream at me that that's madness, it won't work, you can't be mad and get paid for it, think about what I just said, the kaleidoscope. The kaleidoscope's entire purpose is to thrill you and surprise you with its constant and unpredictable changes. The coloured glass is contained inside the scope's body, and the images are contained within a vessel. So it's a great metaphor. That's the vocation. Now, society expects the kaleidoscope to do this. It wants it to do this. You buy it because it does this. What would happen if you went to buy one and it only gave you 10 designs that were pre-programmed? Hello? Think about it. So make sure that the vocation you choose can contain all of your madness or humongous quantity of changing ideas, but it will have boundaries, and the boundaries are important as they form a kind of performance chamber for you to build the steam within. That's the alchemy I keep going on about. You've got to contain the crazy inside some limits in order for it to be able to form up or manifest into material output. So go back to the Greek gods, might be sabotaging your art video, where I talk about Dionysius and Apollo and how the metaphor of that works. If you don't have this lovely relationship or combination, the contained creativity where it can do a million different kaleidoscope images, it gets called scatterbrain or madness or lack of focus because it is not contained, right? And that's where we have what is diagnosed as bipolar and mental disorders and ADHD and blah, 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 blah. It goes on simply because the person is not working inside a container that is suited for their vacillations. Now remember what I just said about the kaleidoscope with only 10 designs? Even within the right container or vocation, say being an artist, you can still become a boring fart. Contain yourself, your energy, and to build steam. Put the bouncers on the door so no one can come in, and regulate what's going on in there until you have done your work. When you go in there, when you go into your container, your mad container of creativity, honestly, the stuff that goes on in there, you just don't want to talk to a psych about it. Oh, and the other day, a really good example of this is I came across a video on William Blake. A lot of people relate to him more about his poetry, but they say he was the greatest spiritual painter ever. It's just one of those stories where while he was alive, he got no recognition at all for his writing and his painting. And there was one story in there about the only critique he ever got, and it was brutal. And the critic said something like the only reason he wasn't locked up in a mad institution was because of his benign effect on people or something like that. And he had no doubts about himself, his creative visions and what he was doing. But honestly, that gives you just one example of someone who fought through and stood by himself. And look, he didn't get any recognition while he was alive, but now his paintings are worth millions of dollars, his poems are all over the place. What happens in Fight Club stays in Fight Club. What happens in your studio with your madness stays in there. And that container as an artist gives you lots of room for that dance. So just remember, for really creative personalities from a young age to an old age, if you get trapped in a static machine that relies on reliability and dependability in the nature of output, you will appear faulty. So don't put yourself in a place where you can get judged. Be careful. There are so many people in prison, young people in prison, who are so creative and they never had the opportunity to express themselves creatively, so they just turned their creative thoughts to actually, doing crime, because they thought outside the box without those boundaries. If they had that chance to learn art, things changed for them very quickly. But the only thing that's happened is that the measuring stick is wrong. Be warned. Once you know who you are, and that requires balls, you need a fair amount of arrogance and stubbornness to hold that space. But so far, anyone I know who got to that point is unbreakable. So look forward to that if you're not already there. And I know from your comments, quite a few of you are well and truly there. And that's really nice to hear.